Okay, welcome, you guys. We're so glad to be here. We've just been chit-chatting before hitting record. I have Amy Simon with me today, and we're going to talk about fine-tuning your focus, knowing your reader and message. And this is a 2.0. I actually went back into the archives to figure out where 1.0 was, and that was way back in May of 2023. Yeah, so we've had some time under our belt, but I think in that time, you've kind of gotten some more clarity on this whole idea of reader and message. So, Amy, thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Amy and I do a lot of things together in the online world. We had the opportunity to meet in person this past June at a writing retreat for the writer's block, but we also link up in doing a mentorship program for the Tutu Launch Lab, which is coming up soon. You'll be hearing more about that, but Amy, tell us a little bit for those who are new to you and what you do. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, I help writers, Christian writers, figure out who they're writing for and what message that they are uniquely created by God to offer others. And I also talk with writers about things like figuring out how to have a consistent writing routine and getting outside of our heads and dealing with all of the head games that can be such an issue with the writing life. So, and all from a Christian perspective. So, I have a podcast called The Purposeful Pen, where we talk about all of those things. And I coach writers, and I also write on different topics related to spiritual formation, spiritual growth, things like that. So, and then try to connect them all together, which
Yeah.
we'll talk about.
Yeah, I think that's part of the 2.0 aspect we're going
Yes.
to talk about. But I loved what you said about that you help writers kind of find out what God has uniquely created them to be and to talk about. And I think that I love the way you phrase that because I think so often we get caught in that imposter syndrome of like, I don't have anything to say, or nobody really needs to know what I think about these things, or who am I to talk about these things. But I love that you said like God uniquely gifts writers, doesn't he, to share their words, to share their encouragement, to share their hope with people.
Absolutely. And we each, no, there's nothing new under the sun. You're not going to come up with, a completely unique, separate, different topic that no one else has talked about before. It's just impossible. But we do each have a unique set of passions and gifts and life experiences that have given us a unique perspective on whatever topic that is important to us that God has given us to share with others. And so even though the topic is going to overlap with what other people talk about, we each have a unique way of looking at that and approaching that topic that someone out there needs to hear.
Yeah, I think that's important. Like that you have a perspective on things that other people can benefit from. And so that makes it you're the one to share that message even when you sometimes feel like somebody else can do it better. So I appreciate that. So okay, you came and talked to the writer's block back in May of 23. We talked about this whole concept of finding your reader and message. And I think that this is really foundational to writing in any form, really, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You need to know who's my audience, who am I writing to? So, and we talk a lot about that in the Launch Lab as well. Writers really have to do some deep work to figure out who it is that they're writing to. So why do you think a 2.0 of that message is needed?
Well, it's such a process, and as we walk through this process, we learn by doing. And so we can go through kind of that initial information of, okay, this is kind of what you're looking for. You want to find the overlap of, your own unique passions and gifts and life experiences with a need that a specific reader has. And that's kind of what we talked about in the 1.0. But I think as we do that, and as we get to know ourselves better, and we get to know even our message itself better, as we do more writing on it, we become more and more of an expert on that topic. We learn new things. We kind of hone it in even more closely sometimes. So, sometimes we have to overcome the roadblock too of, okay, right, I need to do this consistently. I need to write consistently so that I can grow in that message and get to know it even more myself, interact with readers, find out what things are really resonating and what isn't resonating. And so over time, as we kind of experiment with things and learn and grow in that message, we refine it even more. And there's even also an aspect of taking a step back and looking at like, okay, our career as a whole, which is one of the things we're going to talk about on Thursday. How does this reader and message fit into my broader life, my broader work as a writer? How do all the pieces fit in the puzzle?
Yeah, I love that because it does take time. It does take time and practice to kind of get to know your own voice. Number one, I think you become more confident the longer you do it. But you kind of you also learn to kind of discern what's resonating with people. You use that word. Where am I kind of feeling this click together? I recently I was editing an old post of mine on my website and it was so cringe. And I hated that feeling. I was like, oh, but it was good too because I was like, well, I've gotten better. Like now that I can go back, I can look and see, oh, like I've gotten better. I would not say it that way today, but I believed it then. And so it's the same thing, isn't it? Like when you're working with kind of honing this craft, this is all part of the craft of writing, I think. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And we do grow one of the things that I've seen is the connection between our reader and message and our own personal brand, like from the perspective of how do I present myself? How do I show up online or in person? What is my voice? Like you mentioned, am I funny? Am I laid back? Am I real formal? Or like how do I present myself? And that takes some time. That takes some experimenting. Like, do I want to show up and dance on Instagram Reels or not so much? What does this look like? How do I want to present myself? And yeah, that takes time. And we develop that over time by doing it, by trial and error and experimenting.
Yeah, absolutely. I chuckled at the writing and dancing on Instagram because I mean, if you can do that well, I am so just in awe of you. But I do think that we do sometimes feel like we have to fit into that mold of doing those things, and often it just isn't true to who we are. And I think that's what you're saying is like it's as much about self-discovery as it is about discovering like this person that you are trying to connect with online. So what does that look like for you? I mean, I know that you do a lot of work in writerly spaces. So how has it kind of changed over time for you and your brand?
Well, I have done some experimenting. I, for a long time, had basically two different audiences, which when I teach about this, I tell you don't do that. But I was trying to do it anyway. And I found that my advice is good because it wasn't working.
Yeah, you wanted to prove yourself wrong, but that just
Right.
didn't work out. Yeah.
It just didn't work out. So I was writing in this like spiritual formation space, helping Christians to grow in their own self-awareness by using journaling and spiritual disciplines to kind of get below the surface with the things that they were struggling with, and replacing lies that they believed about themselves, about God, about others, with truth from God's word. So it had that definitely a strong journaling piece, but these people weren't necessarily writers. Then I started the podcast and got more into coaching and all of that sort of thing, working with newer Christian writers, touching on some of the same topics, because writers deal with a lot of these head games as far as, like imposter syndrome and all of that. Like, who am I to really have something to offer someone else? So there was a lot of overlap in the messaging and some of the topics that I talked about, but one was geared towards non-writers and one was geared towards specifically writers. And I tried to keep up this juggling act between the two of them, and it was just too hard to really have that divided attention. I felt like I wasn't really doing either one well. And so I recently decided, I actually talked with a business coach and decided to combine those audiences. And because there is a lot of overlap. I mean, the Christian writers are also Christians, and growing in writing, you also want to be growing in your faith, right? And so the messages applied to both messages applied to writers. But I also really didn't want to lose my non-writers, but it's hard. It was just too hard to do both. And I realized that, I do speak to those non-writers at my church and in that venue. So it's not like I'm deserting them. So I've been working the last couple months to combine those audiences into one. And, yes, I will probably lose some of the non-writers in particular, but it's just kind of part of the deal. I can't, it's just too much to try and do both. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that I have been working on, because then I can focus my attention on this sort of combined piece and have spiritual formation be part of my message to my writers and any non-writers that want to stick around.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really a common thing for creators to come across, is that we want to be all things to all people, right? We want to just be able to keep them engaged and benefiting from the content that we're writing and creating. And yet we as creators have to kind of get more narrow in our focus for our own enjoyment. And it sounds like what you were going through was you were feeling the tension of I can't do both of these things well. And so I'm gonna really lean into serving this one segment. And you were kind of leaning that way anyway, right? Because you had this podcast going and you're engaging with people on this topic. So that seemed probably like the more natural choice of the two, like if you were picking between the two. So, I mean, would you say that that's who you serve now, is Christian writers, or are you still saying Christian writers and spiritual formation topics?
I would say that my main audience is Christian writers. However, one of my buckets of content with those Christian writers involves spiritual formation, because that's part of the writing process. Part of being a Christian writer is growing ourselves. And so it made more sense to go that direction, because both aspects of the message apply to Christian writers. It's just that the writing piece doesn't apply to the other audience. So what made the most sense was to focus on the Christian writers, because then I could incorporate all of that messaging, all of that type of content for that one group of people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then it becomes kind of like this subtopic, or you called it a bucket or a category of writing that you can continue to do, and that nestles in neatly with what your overarching um, category would be. Um, so what's been challenging? I mean, I imagine it was hard to pull that trigger and to make that decision and really kind of pivot what you were doing. But what other things did you run into as you were making these changes?
Well, and I think trying to figure out, I mean, I didn't want to ditch my non-writers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I felt like I had spent a lot of time building up like that portion of my email list. And I knew that I was probably going to lose some of them who are like, well, I'm not a writer, and so I don't want to hear about this, you know. Um, and yeah, I just wrote the first like so I brought them all in and combined my email list into the one big chunk, and trying to write that first email, sort of addressing both people groups, but being clear about what I was offering, that took so much time. Like I put
Yeah.
that off. Like, how do I do this? I don't want to make them feel like I'm not serving them anymore. And so yeah, so I ended up coming up with a newsletter that starts off with spiritual formation topics, since that applies to both. And then I've got a bunch of writerly things later on. And we'll see if that, again, it's experimentation, it's trial and error. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it feels risky, right? You're making a move and it's a change. And I think going into those things is important to have an expectation that, yeah, some people will roll off, but the more specific you can become, the bigger impact that will probably be in the long term. Kathy said in the chat that merging that spiritual formation into Christian writing will have a broader impact than the other way around. And so I think that that's a good question to ask yourself if you're considering doing this. Like, could one of these topics be a subcategory under the bigger one? Which one serves a bigger audience, or the audience I really am more interested in reaching?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely.
So, you talked a little bit about just finding it like a necessary thing for your own peace of mind, but maybe you could talk to somebody else who might be struggling with a similar thing. Like, what would you, how would you encourage that person to either do it or maybe some questions to ask yourself if it's right for you to do something similar?
To merge two audiences or to,
Yeah, or to make that pivot, whatever that pivot might look like for you as the creator.
I think a lot of times, and I run into this when I'm coaching people too, that, you know, sometimes we have so many different things that feel like very different interests and topics that we want to talk about. And I think a lot of times the challenge is to find the thing that's the overarching, what is the umbrella over all of these things? You know, they might feel like very different topics, but they probably connect together somehow. And to look for that, what is the overarching umbrella that these other topics can kind of fall under? That can be really helpful and clarifying. Um, yeah, and to find the thing, like, what is it that you really want to be talking about? Like, which topic are you most excited about? Which people group are you most excited about serving? And, you know, which people group and topic is God really laying on your heart to, you know, yeah, this is the niche I want you to fill. So, and sometimes that and we're going to talk about broad and narrow on Thursday, but um, sometimes that overarching topic can be on the broader side, but then there are other specific aspects of it that all unite it together. So I don't know if that's a good way to answer your question or not.
No, I think it is helpful. And I really like that you said, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to talk about? What lights you up inside? Because if you're afraid to lose subscribers or followers or whatever, because you've got this, you've spent time building up this audience, but you're not really enjoying it anymore. Like, I think that's really important. And I think a lot of creators do need to do that pivot. We're going to talk in a few weeks with another writer, Pamela Hinkleman, who's going to talk to us about that same thing, where she just kind of felt like the stage in her life was changing, and so therefore her message was changing. So we're gonna talk about that. All of these factors factor in to to what we put out into the world.
And sometimes all the pieces, all the aspects of your life don't have to fit into your writing online. Like, I lead the women's ministry at my church. And so I end up, I'll speak at events sometimes and talk about some of those spiritual formation topics. And so there's other outlets for to address that audience. And honestly, a lot of the people who are on my email list for just the spiritual formation topic, I think they're mostly people from my church, like from events that I've done and things like that. And so like it doesn't all have to fit online. There can be other outlets for some of these other interests.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can nurture those audiences in different ways too.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
good. So one of the things I've always said about Amy is that she's a really good question asker. Like, she kind of thinks about things from a very different angle that kind of sheds new light on it. And so I know you do that with coaching other writers. And so have you experienced that in your business of how do you help people get that clarity that maybe they're really looking for? What's your secret sauce, Amy?
Well, I enjoy listening to, what are the uniquenesses about this person I'm talking to, have they traveled all over the place and so have a unique view of the world? Are they super interested in biblical history, or what is unique and different about them? And what is the, like I mentioned earlier, what's the big piece that forms the umbrella over all these different topics? Sometimes if you list all the things that you're interested in, just on a big white piece of paper, they all seem separate, but is there something that would unify them, that would unite them all together? Are they all about some aspect of maybe applying the Bible to your life? Or is mental health one of the, and as it relates to lies that you might have believed about who God is, is that the tying in piece and what fits underneath? So yeah, a lot of times I'm just looking for something that's unique and different. That person is also really seems kind of passionate about. Sometimes you just need someone to bounce that off of, to even hear yourself being like, oh yeah, I really like this, and this really gets me going. Or so yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think so often you just need a sounding board, right? You need somebody who says, I see this about you, or I hear this is what I'm hearing you say. And so that's really, really helpful, because sometimes we just can't get that outside perspective that we desperately need. And just a reminder to our audience is that Amy does that. You can reach out to her and talk to her about her coaching, because I do think that this is one of those things that really, you need some one-on-one time with somebody to really who will listen to you and um, really hear your heart. And so, yeah, I just wanted our listeners to know about that. So, um, yeah, if there, before we wrap up, I just wanted to give Kathy, is with us today, an opportunity to chime in. I don't know, want to put you on the spot, but if you have any thoughts or questions for Amy.
I was thinking about is the is the demographic of your audience a possibility for your umbrella? Or are you better off having more of a niche in terms of like the topic or the area and then other buckets that fit underneath it?
Just a
question.
demographic is pretty broad. You know, I think like a demographic with a particular type of need, maybe, or struggle.
So like something like empty nester women would be too broad still, because some are still working, some are retired, some have grandchildren, some don't. You know, you're still in a broad category, but you have your lives look different.
That could, so they're united in the fact that they're all empty nesters. You're bringing that piece to the surface. If that's what you're addressing, is their empty nesterness. You
Your
know, like,
identity now, what goes on now? Yeah.
right. Then, and like that could work. And like we'll talk about on Thursday, um, you can have a fairly broad, big umbrella, with then maybe some more specific, you know, people within that category. Like, say, okay, you feel like you want to address, you know, some of the needs that empty nester parents have. And then maybe one, you know, a book project or something might be a very specific aspect of that, you know, empty nesters and, well, this is Pamela Henkelman's, but, you know, her relationship with your, you know, young adult children or something like that. And then for individual projects, have a very even more specific,
Mhm.
you know, need that you're addressing and things like that. Does that kind of make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, yeah. I still think probably overall, if you were on a topic, there's lots of ways to approach, you know, a subject more than a particular demographic. But that was, you know, when I because some of the classes that I've done with you, we've talked a lot about, well, who is your audience? And, you know, is it me 10 years ago, or is it me tomorrow? Or is it, you know, or is it something in between? And, you know, depending on the day, for me to narrow down like my topic or what I'm interested, well, and what I'm interested in varies from, you know, from day to day, week to week. So, you know, I think sometimes you get caught with, well, this doesn't fit in any particular category. And I know Jana says sometimes that if you write something that doesn't fit in your own niche, put it out to another publication. But,
Yeah, like I said, everything doesn't have to fit into your online presence, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And maybe too, Kathy, if you struggle from too many ideas, right? Like you've got ideas just coming out the wazoo. You just can't even like really categorize it. Maybe a good exercise would be to write, just brain dump all those ideas out and look for common threads, and maybe look for what what is predominant, like Amy said earlier, versus like what could be subcategories. But yeah, that's a really good question, because I think sometimes in my mind, I'm I'm writing to a demographic, um, both male and female, and so that is really, that's a good question.
Well, and you know, we're again gonna talk about this on Thursday, but you know, if you take a step back and look at, you know, okay, your writing career, for lack of a better term, as a whole, like, hopefully you have more than one like book idea in you, there will be time, Lord willing, to address different, very specific topics. But I think the point is to focus on one at a time. And especially as we're trying to build our platform and help people get to know us, it's really helpful to have a real specific focus with the understanding that you could, broaden, do other specific focuses under a broader topic down the road. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you had told me that once in the launch lab too. Just pick something and do it for 3 months and see how you feel about it. And then if that's not the topic that thrills you, then pivot to something else. So yeah,
Sure.
that is helpful because even with your own audience, you're going to grow and change and your audience needs do as well. So I guess part of me says, well, if I'm interested in it, somebody else has got to be interested in it too.
Which is true.
Yeah.
I think that is true. Well, you've talked and teased a little bit out about what Thursday is going to entail, but maybe you can give us an overview. What can we expect for Thursday's teaching?
So we're gonna take a more of a 10,000-foot view at first and look at kind of the big picture of why do we need to be specific right now and what might that look like down the road. We're gonna talk about kind of the elephant in the room with these things of what if I can't pick just one? There's more things that I want to talk about, or what if I want to talk about a topic that is fairly seasonal for my readers, like being a young mom or whatever, caring for aged parents or something like that. Like, can my XYZ change over time and what might that look like and things like that. We're going to talk about where branding kind of fits into the picture and look at some other writers and their careers and how they have made that work. Some with a very broad kind of umbrella statement and others with a much more narrow one. And so, yeah, I think it'd be helpful to help people figure out if you understand where you are in the broader picture, it can be easier to have confidence that like, okay, no, this is what I'm focusing on right now. It won't always look like this, but this is what I'm doing now.
I love that. That sounds really interesting. And one thing that came to mind is that idea of know the rules so that you can break them.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's kind of what you're saying is that these are good principles to put in place and to follow most of the time so that when you have the freedom to break them and not lose people aren't confused by who you are as a creator.
Right.
Yeah.
And to look at other people, the way that other people do it, give us an example of like, okay, well, it can work if you're much more broad. It can also work if you're much more narrow. And these are some how other people have done it. Not that we copy those, but it gives us some ideas of there is no one magic answer of how to do this thing, but there are different principles, like you said.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Amy. We always enjoy chatting with you and learning from you, and we're looking forward to Thursday's teaching. I hope that for all of you who are listening, that you'll join us on Thursday.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.